Quinn barely had time to gasp before her ankle twisted, and the world tilted sideways. In one spectacular, mortifying moment, she tripped over her own suitcase, sending it flying open in the middle of JFK Airport's busiest terminal. Clothes, toiletries, and oh dear God, her underwear scattered across the polished floors, right in front of dozens of rushing travelers. Heat flooded her cheeks as she scrambled to collect her things, but before she could reach for a runaway bra, a strong hand beat her to it. "Here," a deep, smooth voice said. Quinn looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. The man crouched beside her was devastatingly handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and a sharp jawline that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. His tailored navy suit screamed wealth, and the way he carried himself with effortless confidence made her stomach flip. Thank you," she stammered, snatching the bra from his hand and shoving it into her suitcase. He chuckled, the sound rich and amused. "Rough day." "You have no idea," she muttered, hastily stuffing the rest of her things back inside. The man, who had absolutely no business looking that good, while helping a complete disaster of a stranger, reached for a silk blouse that had landed near his polished shoes. He folded it neatly before handing it to her. "You traveling for work or pleasure?" "Neither," Quinn sighed, "more like survival." His brow lifted with interest. "Sounds intriguing." "Not really." She zipped up her suitcase and stood, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face, just trying to start over. "New job, new city, new life." The man studied her for a beat, then extended his hand. "Tristan," she hesitated. Something about him made her nervous, not in a bad way, but in the kind of way that made her pulse race. As if shaking his hand might send her life in a direction she wasn't prepared for. Still, it would be rude not to. "Quinn," she said, slipping her hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, lingering just a second too long. When he finally let go, she felt the absence of it more than she should have. "Well, Quinn," Tristan said, glancing at her suitcase, "I hope your fresh start treats you well." "Thanks," she said, hoisting her bag upright. "And thanks for, saving me from complete humiliation." His lips twitched. "I think you did that all on your own." She rolled her eyes, but a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "Okay, fair." Tristan glanced at his watch. "I should go, but—" "Good luck." Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving her standing there with a racing heart and a strange, nagging feeling that she hadn't seen the last of him. Little did she know, Tristan wasn't just some passing stranger, and he wasn't just anyone. He was Tristan Vale, the CEO of Vale Enterprises, one of the youngest, most powerful millionaires in the country. And by some twist of fate, their paths were about to cross again. Quinn dragged her suitcase through the revolving doors of her new office building, still replaying the brief but unforgettable encounter with Tristan at the airport. It was ridiculous to still be thinking about him. He was just a stranger who happened to witness her most embarrassing moment. Nothing more. Yet her mind kept drifting back to the way his gaze had lingered, the warmth of his hand when they shook, the deep, rich cadence of his voice. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus. Today was her first day at Vale Enterprises, and she couldn't afford distractions. The lobby was sleek and modern, with polished marble floors and towering glass windows that let in streams of golden morning light. Employees bustled around her, dressed in sharp suits and high heels, exuding the kind of confidence she could only aspire to. She approached the receptionist, who barely glanced up before handing her a visitor's pass. "New hire orientation is on the 32nd floor. Take the elevator on the left." Quinn nodded, mumbling her thanks before stepping into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, her nerves bubbled up. This job was her fresh start, her chance to prove herself. She wouldn't let anything, not even the lingering thoughts of a stranger, get in her way. When the doors opened onto the 32nd floor, she was met with a sleek conference room filled with other new hires. A woman in a navy pencil skirt and crisp blouse stood at the front, her expression poised and professional. "Welcome to Vale Enterprises," she said. "I'm Evelyn Carter, head of human resources. You're here today because you've been selected from thousands of applicants to be part of a company that prides itself on excellence. Over the course of the next few weeks, you'll be learning." The words faded into background noise as the glass doors behind Evelyn suddenly swung open. A tall figure strode in, exuding authority. Quinn's breath caught in her throat. Tristan. Gone was the slightly amused airport stranger. In his place stood a man who commanded the room without trying. His sharp navy suit fit him with tailored perfection, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the room. Every new hire in the room straightened, the air shifting with tension. Evelyn cleared her throat. "Everyone, this is Tristan Vale, our CEO." Quinn's stomach flipped. "CEO?" His gaze swept over the group, pausing when it landed on her. A flicker of recognition flashed in his eyes, but he masked it almost instantly. "Welcome to Vale Enterprises," he said, his voice steady, authoritative. "You're here because we believe in your potential. Work hard, prove yourselves, and you'll find opportunity here. That's all I ask." The room remained silent, hanging onto his every word. Then, just as quickly as he had arrived, he turned on his heel and walked out. Quinn exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had just started a job at one of the most prestigious companies in the country. And her boss, the CEO himself, was the man who had picked up her bra in the middle of an airport. This was going to be interesting. Quinn forced herself to focus as the first few weeks at Vale Enterprises rushed by in a blur of deadlines, meetings, and an overwhelming need to prove herself. The company was fast-paced, demanding, and utterly relentless, exactly the kind of challenge she had been craving. But there was one complication she hadn't anticipated: Tristan. It wasn't just that he was her CEO. It was the way their paths kept crossing in unexpected ways, an impromptu elevator ride where silence crackled with unspoken tension, a passing glance in the hallway that lingered a second too long, moments during company meetings when she could feel the weight of his gaze before she even looked up. And yet he remained unreadable, professional, distant, until the night of the gala. Vale Enterprises was hosting an exclusive charity event, and attendance was mandatory for all employees. Quinn had debated skipping. She barely had enough money to afford rent, much less a designer dress, but her mentor in the marketing department had insisted. Which was how she found herself standing in the grand ballroom of one of New York's most luxurious hotels, surrounded by glittering chandeliers, flowing champagne, and an elite crowd dressed in couture. She had managed to borrow a sleek black gown from a coworker, but she still felt like an outsider in a world of opulence. She stuck close to the edges of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water and trying not to feel awkward. That was, until she heard his voice behind her. "I was starting to think you wouldn't show." Her pulse jumped. She turned, meeting Tristan's gaze. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo, every inch the powerful businessman, yet there was something different about him tonight, something less guarded. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "Figured no one would notice if I wasn't here." His lips curved slightly. "I would have." She exhaled slowly, unsure how to respond to that. Before she could find words, an older man approached, clapping Tristan on the shoulder. "Vale, good to see you." Tristan's expression shifted instantly, polite but cool. "Senator Caldwell, always a pleasure." The senator barely glanced at Quinn before focusing on Tristan. "We should discuss the investment proposal soon." "I'd hate to see funding go elsewhere." "I'll have my team set up a meeting," Tristan replied smoothly. With a nod, the senator moved on, leaving a charged silence in his wake. Quinn tilted her head at Tristan. "You didn't seem too thrilled about that conversation." He exhaled sharply, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Politics and business make for exhausting company." She studied him carefully. "You don't like this, do you?" His brow lifted slightly. This world. The endless networking, the fake smiles. Something flickered in his gaze, something she hadn't seen before. "It's necessary." "But do you like it?" He hesitated. Then instead of answering, he asked, "Do you?" She huffed a quiet laugh, glancing around the room. "Are you kidding? I barely belong here." His expression darkened at that. "Who told you that?" "No one had to," she said simply. "It's just obvious." He took a step closer, his voice lower now. "Obvious to who?" she swallowed. He was too close, the air between them charged. Before she could answer, the music shifted into a slow, melodic tune. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, moving with practiced ease. Tristan extended his hand. "Dance with me," she blinked. "What?" "One dance." His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, a challenge maybe, or something deeper. Everything in her screamed that this was a terrible idea. That stepping into his world, even for one dance, would change things in ways she wasn't ready for. And yet, she placed her hand in his. His fingers curled around hers, strong and sure, as he led her onto the dance floor. One hand settled lightly on her waist, the other holding hers firmly. The moment their bodies aligned, she knew she was in trouble. The moment Tristan's hand settled on her waist, Quinn felt the world narrow to just the two of them. The music played softly around them, but she barely registered it. All she could focus on was the warmth of his touch, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his fingers curled slightly around hers as they moved in perfect sync. His eyes never left hers. "You're a good dancer," she murmured, more to distract herself than anything else. His lips curved slightly. "I had a good reason to learn." She arched a brow. "And what reason was that?" His thumb traced an absent-minded circle against her hand before he answered. "Mom thought it was necessary for a man in my position. I didn't see the point at the time, but I suppose it has its uses." Quinn tilted her head. "Are you saying you only dance when required?" His gaze dropped briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "Not always." A shiver ran through her, electricity crackling between them. It was impossible to ignore now this pull, this undeniable force drawing them closer. She should step back, create space, but she didn't. Instead, she let herself be guided across the dance floor, her pulse quickening with every turn, every shift in movement that brought them closer, until there was barely any space left between them at all. And then, just as suddenly, the song ended. The moment shattered. Tristan let go first, his fingers lingering just a fraction longer than necessary before he stepped back. His expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes, something raw, unguarded. Quinn swallowed hard, her heart hammering as she searched for something to say, anything that wouldn't betray the fact that her knees felt unsteady. But before she could find the words, a voice cut through the moment. "Tristan." "There you are." A woman appeared beside them, stunning in an emerald gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights. She was elegant, poised, every bit as polished as the world Tristan belonged to. Quinn instinctively took a step back. The woman barely spared her a glance before placing a hand on Tristan's arm, her red lips curving into a practiced smile. "I've been looking for you. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Tristan's expression hardened, but he didn't pull away. Quinn didn't wait to hear more. She turned, slipping away through the crowd, ignoring the strange ache in her chest. This was a mistake. Whatever this was between them, whatever had been building, it wasn't meant to happen. She was just an employee. He was Tristan Vale, CEO, untouchable. And tonight had been nothing more than a fleeting moment in a world she didn't belong to. Or at least, that's what she tried to tell herself. Even though, deep down, she knew it was a lie, Quinn barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Tristan's hand on her waist, his gaze lingering in a way that had made her breath hitch. But the moment had shattered too quickly, replaced by the stark reality of the world he belonged to, a world where elegant women in emerald gowns knew exactly how to fit by his side, while she was just another employee who had wandered too close to something impossible. By the time morning arrived, she forced herself to shove the entire night from her mind. She had come to Vale Enterprises for a fresh start, not to get distracted by a man who was completely out of reach. Still, when she arrived at the office, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Whispers circulated about the gala, the kind of hushed gossip that only fueled the unease churning in her stomach. At her desk, she tried to focus, skimming through emails and reviewing campaigns, but she felt it before she saw the distinct presence of someone standing nearby. She looked up. Tristan. Dressed in dark gray, his usual controlled demeanor was intact, but there was something different in his eyes, something searching. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Every rational thought told her to make an excuse, to say she was busy, but something in his tone quiet, yet firm made her rise from her seat and follow. He led her to the private terrace on the top floor, where the city stretched out below them in endless lights and motion. The sky was overcast, the crisp air cutting through the tension between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tristan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You left last night." Quinn's fingers curled against the railing. "You were busy." Something flickered in his expression. "That's not why you left." She let out a quiet breath. "It doesn't matter, does it?" He turned to her fully, his gaze steady. "It does." The certainty in his voice sent her pulse racing. She swallowed, forcing herself to keep her voice even. "Tristan, we work together." "I know. And she hesitated, searching for the right words. "You have a life, a world that doesn't include me." His jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" "No one had to," she said carefully. "It's just the way things are." For the first time since she'd met him, frustration flickered across his features. "You think I care about any of that?" She hesitated. He took a step closer, closing the space between them. "None of it matters, Quinn. Not the company, not the expectations. Not the politics." His voice lowered, raw and unguarded. "You walked away last night and I let you, but I won't make that mistake again." Her breath caught. It would be so easy to believe him, to let herself fall into the pull between them, but the fear of what it could mean, of where it could lead, held her back. "This is dangerous," she whispered. His gaze didn't waver. "Only if you walk away from me again." She searched his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt, but there was none, and that was what terrified her the most. Because if Tristan Vale, the man who had built an empire, who had the world at his feet, was willing to risk everything for her, then maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong about where she belonged. Maybe she had belonged here all along. Quinn knew she should step away. She knew that crossing this line, allowing herself to believe in something impossible between them, was reckless. But as Tristan stood before her, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen before, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to walk away. The city stretched out behind him, a backdrop of endless motion and distant lights, but the only thing she could focus on was the man standing in front of her. His presence, steady and unwavering, felt like gravity itself. He wasn't giving her an easy way out, and maybe, just maybe, she didn't want one. But before she could respond, the terrace doors swung open. A sharp voice cut through the charged air. "There you are." Quinn turned as Evelyn Carter, the head of HR, stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something pointed in the way her gaze flickered between them. Tristan exhaled, his posture shifting back into the composed, unreadable businessman. "Evelyn," she looked directly at him, "we have a situation with the Caldwell contract. You're needed in the boardroom." The moment shattered. Quinn took a step back, the reality of where they were, of what had just almost happened, crashing down on her. Tristan hesitated, his gaze lingering on her for a beat too long before he finally nodded. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." Evelyn didn't acknowledge Quinn as she turned and left, but her presence had been enough. The unspoken warning was clear. This was dangerous. Quinn forced herself to speak, though her voice was quieter now. "You should go." Tristan stayed where he was, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to reach for her but knew he shouldn't. For a long moment he just looked at her, then with a quiet exhale he nodded. "This isn't over," he said. Then he turned and walked away. Quinn stood there, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. Maybe it wasn't over, but she had no idea what came next. The following days passed in a blur. Quinn threw herself into work, determined to drown out the constant thoughts of Tristan and what had almost happened between them. But avoiding him was impossible. Every meeting, every passing glance in the hallway, it was as if an unseen force kept pulling them toward each other. And the more she tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. Then late one evening, as she packed up her things to leave, her phone buzzed. A message, not just any message. "Tristan, come to the rooftop." Her heartbeat stuttered. She could ignore it. Pretend she hadn't seen it. Pretend that she wasn't waiting for something, anything, that would pull her back toward him. But she knew, deep down, that she had already made her choice. Minutes later, she stepped out onto the rooftop, the cool night air wrapping around her as she found him standing near the edge, looking out over the city. He turned when he heard her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I meant what I said. This isn't over." Quinn swallowed, her pulse unsteady. "Tristan," he stepped closer, "I know the risks. I know what this means, but none of that changes how I feel about you." Her breath caught. He didn't hesitate this time. He reached for her, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Tell me you don't feel it too, and I'll walk away right now." She couldn't, because she did feel it. It had been there from the moment they met, from the way he had looked at her like she was something more than just another employee, from the way he had held her on that dance floor like she was the only thing that mattered. So she didn't say anything. She just closed the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that shattered every last hesitation. Tristan responded instantly, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her closer, as if he had been waiting for this moment just as much as she had. The city stretched out around them, endless and full of possibilities. And for the first time, Quinn wasn't afraid of where this would lead. Because wherever it was, she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone.